The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I rise today along with my colleagues from Illinois and from Wisconsin, and you just heard from Senator Baldwin, about the effect of this budget bill on the Midwest. I guess I'd start by asking the same questions that our colleague, Senator Tillis, who just announced he wasn't going to seek re-election after the president threatened him with a primary, and after he took a vote and had the audacity to ask the questions that had to be asked about this bill. And you heard him today. He talked about how he had talked to the hospital association in his state, how he had talked to the governor's office, how he had gotten the actual data on the effects of Medicaid in North Carolina. And then he asked the questions, how hard is it to see the impact of these proposals? And he asked, what's wrong with putting a little daylight on what's going on here? So that's what I'm going to do in my few minutes here. Put a little Midwestern daylight on what's going on here. That is that under this bill, 17 million people would be kicked off their health care because of the Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act changes. That was 16 million people until we got the updated numbers from the Congressional Budget Office. That's a nonpartisan group. It also drives $4 trillion in debt. It used to be 3.4. Now it's up to $4 trillion. And what will that mean? That will mean big time in the Midwest, where I have so many of my own constituents wanting to buy their first house. It's going to mean major increased interest rates. It's going to mean difficulty in buying all kinds of things for which you would take out loans, or for small businesses. All for giving a bunch of tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. $400,000 for multi-millionaires. Our colleagues are going to raise costs and take health care and food away from millions of Americans. So my colleagues have talked about, Senator Baldwin and Senator Durbin, talked about the effect that this bill has in the Midwest when it comes to health care, the closing of the rural hospitals. The Midwest has a huge number of these rural hospitals, about half of them that be forecast to close. She talked about the Medicaid cuts. So I'm going to talk about a different piece of this, and this is the impact of cuts to food assistance. There is no avoiding the facts. Here they are. About a month ago, the House passed a budget bill, as you know, that cut nutrition assistance by nearly $300 billion. It put the country on track to eliminate SNAP for 4 million Americans and reduce benefits for millions more. I was hopeful that we would go in another direction. And while there were some changes made by the Republicans on the Agriculture Committee that I appreciated, it still amounts to over $185 billion in cuts from the SNAP program. And let me remind you that the vast majority of people on SNAP are older Americans, people with kids, veterans, people with disabilities. We were just out on the Senate steps with a number of those people and the groups that they represent and faith leaders talking about this very subject. Why them? Why give tax cuts to the wealthy on their backs? We know that the impact of the big, beautiful betrayal of a bill will be even more stark in the Midwest. In the Midwest, here are some examples. Americans use SNAP benefits. Nearly 155,000 people in Nebraska. And let's face it, that is not the biggest population state, but 155,000 Nebraskans use SNAP. About 190,000 people in Kansas, 260,000 people in Iowa, 660,000 people in Missouri, 700,000 people in the state of Wisconsin. Senator Baldwin just talked about the impact of health care there, but 700,000 people and my neighbors in Wisconsin. Nearly 1.5 million people in Michigan use SNAP. And in Minnesota, 450,000. So yes, those people will be affected greatly by this faux shift to the state. And unfortunately, while we tried to fight part of this, the state shift, we were not able to get that changed in the last few days. This means certain states, I'm just going to give you some examples, hundreds of millions of dollars are supposed to shift over to states in the Midwest when 41 of the 50 states in our country have balanced budget amendments. So what are they supposed to do? Cut infrastructure? Cut law enforcement? When the majority of these cuts, and this is why this is such funny math, are shifts to the states. And it's why governors, especially in the Midwest, Governor Kelly in the state of Kansas has been speaking out big time on this, why they are so concerned about these shifts. In addition, and this is not something everyone thinks about when they think about SNAP, but we think about it big time in the Midwest, farmers and grocers. Over a third of America's farmland is located in the Midwest. That includes more than 722,000 farm operations, which is more than 1/3 of farms nationwide. So why would farmers care about this? Well, they will lose revenue because Americans won't be able to buy their products. And that loss, that's a SNAP program, right? It buys food from America, just like international organizations were buying food from America with USAID. That's been cut. Or the Trump tariffs, which dry up markets in places all over the world because of retaliatory tariffs. That's hitting our farmers. Input costs, inflation, you name it. And now this on top of it. In addition, this is going to be a big hit to our grocers. In many rural counties throughout the Midwest, their independent grocery store is the lone grocer in the country, in the county. So in 76 counties nationwide, they don't even have a single grocery store. And half of those are in the Midwest. I recently visited an employee-owned grocery store in rural Long Prairie, Minnesota. Population, 3,600. Businesses like that operate on tight margins, and they usually serve not just that county, as you could see from the numbers I just provided you, but with the surrounding counties, or they may be the only one in town. Businesses like that, the cuts to SNAP, it's pretty significant because that's sometimes the margin on which they're able to stay alive as a business. This would make it harder and more expensive for those grocery stores. It could put them out of business, that's for sure. That's what the grocery stores believe. But it also hurts the individual people in their areas because in the rural areas, you have an overwhelming number of seniors, you've got an overwhelming number of veterans, and you have just an overwhelming number of the people who are using these kinds of grocery stores. So SNAP supports hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in wages at these independent grocers, farms, other industries, including more than 1,700 jobs in Nebraska, more than 1,900 jobs in Kansas, more than 2,600 jobs in Iowa, more than 7,000 jobs in Missouri, more than 6,000 jobs in Wisconsin, more than 13,000 jobs in Michigan, more than 4,000 jobs in Minnesota. We know that from farmers and truckers to local grocers, for every dollar invested in SNAP, about $1.50 of economic activity is generated nationwide. For many Midwesterners, this bill would make the difference between having a grocery store in their region or not. I mentioned the shift of billions of dollars of costs to states that will blow holes through the state budget. They won't be able to afford it. And sadly, our Republican colleagues know this because 44 states have this balanced budget rule. And they're going to be forced to choose between paying the cost for food and paying for critical services. That is why 23 Democratic governors, all of them, just laid out in a letter to Congress. These cuts don't just increase state costs, they make it nearly impossible for states to effectively plan for these long-term budget impacts. Those are governors from Kentucky, with Governor Beshear, to Arizona, with Governor Hobbs. Across the entire nation, we heard from these governors. Not to mention the governors such as Governor Pritzker in Illinois, and Governor Walz in Minnesota, and Governor Kelly in Kansas, and Governor Whitmer in Michigan. Based on 2023 figures, ready for this? The House and Senate version of this bill would shift, and it varies because the bills are different, but this is how much money we're talking to, between $16 million and $49 million onto the state of Nebraska, between $61 million and $101 million in costs onto Kansas. Imagine the budget. And there's suddenly, oh, you got to do an extra $60 million. Too bad you have a balanced budget amendment. Up to $26 million in costs onto Iowa, between $225 million and $376 million onto the state budget in Missouri, up to $68 million in costs onto Wisconsin, where Governor Evers was also a signator of this letter, between $456 and $761 million in costs onto Michigan, and between $43 million and $128 million in costs onto Minnesota. And those numbers are on top of an increased administrative cost shift to states. It used to be 50-50, now it's 75-25. Hello, states, you with strapped budgets, we're now making you pay 75% of administrative costs, which would make it even harder for states to invest in the staff training and upgraded financial systems that would make the program more sound and reduce payment errors. It's not just the state budgets that will be affected. In many states, including Minnesota and Wisconsin, it is counties rather than the states that run the SNAP program. So I had a visit from some of the rural counties, and they talk about living off a margin, a thin margin, trying to help their taxpayers, trying to get this done. In states like Minnesota and Wisconsin that believe in strong local government, big surprise, our states and a number of other sort of states with bigger rural areas have decided we'd rather have the counties do this. So now these cost shifts will go directly to these county governments, and you would not believe the numbers on what they would have to do to increase their taxes in these rural counties. They said, we can't do that. So if that happens, they will have to raise their local property taxes or cut county services. In the past, we have said that if you're raising kids or taking care of an older relative, we're going to help you feed your family, even if you don't have a job. This reconciliation bill would change that. It would withhold food assistance from families raising kids over the age of 13 and adults 55 and up if they don't meet the new requirements. The Senate bill also eliminates an existing exemption for veterans, homeless people, and former foster youth, an exemption my Republican colleagues supported in the Fiscal Responsibility Act just 2 years ago. So this is a shift among the party. The Republican Party actually said this was a good idea to have exemptions for vets and homeless people and former foster youth. Not anymore. These are people who are already struggling, veterans who have sacrificed to serve our country. I believe that when our veterans signed up to serve, there wasn't a waiting line, and when they're in this country and they need help with food, or they need a job, or they need a home, there shouldn't be a waiting line in the United States of America. So everyone that I've talked to about this, just as Senator Tillis was saying about Medicaid in North Carolina, and I've spent time on this. I visit all 87 counties in my state every year. I'm up to 49. So I've been able to talk to people who aren't political, who are Republicans, talk to people I just run into in rural grocery stores, in the vegetable line. I mean, I have talked to a ton of people. And what they have said to the store managers, to the food shelf volunteers, to those that take SNAP, this isn't a good idea. That's what the public opinion polls say. Fox News poll 60% of people say this bill is a bad idea. 2 to 1 say it's going to help wealthy people and not them. Well, they're right about that. This is a betrayal of the middle class, and it only takes 4 of our colleagues, and 4 in the House, by the way, to stand up and say, we need to rewrite this thing. Let's start over. With that, I yield the floor.